Welcome back to Inside the Numbers, folks. Hope you had a good weekend. I'm feeling much more upbeat and positive today. So happy Monday. We're looking at a nice market rally this morning. We're looking at which is on positive news with the data from the coronavirus out in New York. We got a pretty cool show today. We went to YouTube again, which I don't know, some of you may have saw. We're going to do that all week actually, and then hopefully next week we'll get back to the usual schedule. But you know that this is good for you. We're out until we're out on YouTube, which makes it a lot easier for some of you guys to view. I'm going to do basically an intro to voter files today, which will be neat. We'll talk antibodies testing. We'll just jump right into this now, Tim. As usual, folks, Tim Anderson's with me at TJ Anderson1 on Twitter. Again, you know what? Let him open this up and just talk about what he sees the market's doing. We're getting a nice pop today, Tim. This is good. We got Cuomo coming out here soon, and we'll see what he says. But those numbers out of New York, like we talked about a little bit last week, especially the discharges outpacing hospitalizations, and now the death rate down. Just go ahead. Let me let you take it from there. Look at the markets. Sure. What's the Dow's up 5% right now, something like that?
Pretty close to that. Yeah. The stock index futures have been strong right after they opened in trading last night. They opened around 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock Sunday evening. They were up about at least 2 to 3%, kind of built on those gains most of the night. Everything is pretty much trading off data on the virus. There's some positive indications that Italy and Spain have peaked and are coming down what they call the backside of the curve. The White House coronavirus task force had their briefing last night at 7 p.m. They had originally not planned to have one, but I think they had good data to talk about from Italy and Spain, and also some potentially, although really only for one day so far, but potentially some positive data from New York on hospitalizations being down from Saturday to Sunday. And also actually that a piece of data that 75% of people that have been hospitalized in New York have now been discharged. And also that there's been more people.
Well, let me just jump in there because I just watched the Dow cross the 1,000 while you're looking, and we may have to get Tim back. He may have glitched out, but he's back. All right, but while let me just finish that thought. The Dow just crossed the 1,000-point marker. Looks like we're gonna have a really good day today. So we got the Dow. Well, cross fingers here, folks. But the Dow's up about 5% still, but we crossed over 1,000. The S&P is up almost 5%. As with the Nasdaq, the Russell is up over 5%. Nice. I'm looking at it go live here. It's nice. It's nice to finally see those green numbers. And we should take a look at those. The COVID model, because I'm getting a lot of questions, Tim, over the weekend, or really yesterday, about how the Surgeon General was saying that this would be a terrible week. And yet we're seeing at least what may be a glimmer of good news, of, positive news. Even with the hospitalization rates going down, folks, there are still people there in the hospital. So as these new cases come in, this has been the concern all along. Even if they go down, it's still adding to the caseload doctors have. And if you speak to them, they'll tell you they were not looking forward to this week because people are going to keep rolling in. And while it's, all so far good news and a good sign, there is still only so much that some of these areas can take. And like we spoke about on Friday, these are isolated areas. But I'll let you glitched out. I'll let you finish your thought, Tim. And then
I just might mention that I am streaming. I am getting my computer signal from my Wi-Fi. It does pause occasionally. I apologize for that. If it happens, just
it is what it is. Yeah, right. You know what?
I'm trying to get a workaround for that, but it might take a couple days.
Everybody home too, Tim, makes the internet get so overburdened.
Right.
Let's just take a look at the U.S. first. Let's look at this model. Okay, we got some pretty cool graphics. I'll pop it up. I'll put it on the big screen here. I want to explain what a confidence interval is to people, which is what I said on Twitter before. We're way below these worst case scenarios that everybody kept talking about, right? But the confidence interval is this purple area right here, right, for everything basically. And these are beds needed, deaths per day, total deaths. Let's look at deaths per day. This is the entire country, and actually, because New York is so important. What are we at right now? Right? Oh man, my head is the 6th, right? So look, they're giving you a range here, and they're telling you that this could be the deaths projected, and then how much actually happened. A low range 1255, high range 3208. All right, and the median there is 1967. If you look at where we're actually at, okay, and I again, this is why some of these. You don't want to, this is the total death count. So you don't want to jump up and down. And then, of course, the whole idea, which, I criticize myself, of course, and we can get into that. But the whole idea, with us staying home, folks, is that not to make this jump, right? So they'll tell you mitigation efforts are working. Which brings me to the next bit of news here today, which I'm jumping. Again, I'm positive today. I'm really upbeat today because I'm seeing a lot of good things that I like. The antibodies testing, and you heard Dr. Birx talk about it at the unexpected press conference yesterday. She spoke about the importance of these antibody tests. We will not really know whether mitigation efforts are working or not until we start to do large-scale antibodies testing to see what is the ultimate denominator here. How much of the population already had COVID-19? How many, truth be told, they don't really know when this was introduced into the population. So we definitely don't know how many people have actually had it. And people are now using the antibody testing, which, Tim, I'm not hearing this a lot in the news, but a lot of the decline in the death count from New York, which we could look at, a lot of the decline in the death count from New York, I mean, you got to think some of that is attributable to the antibodies treatments, the plasma treatments, and, now hopefully the more widespread use of hydroxychloroquine, which we again talked about on Thursday. But as you can see here, from where even hospitalizations and where worst case people were telling us we would need, we're just not near it yet here, folks. I mean, right now, and here's the
I think there's
projected deaths per day. Yeah. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, and look, I don't think it's inconsistent to see the death count start to level off or hopefully go down, and also to say, well, it's going to be a very bad week, because the 5 to 15 minute testing is going to exponentially just explode the number of people that we can test nationwide during the next couple of weeks. That's going to explode the number of positive cases and very likely increase the amount of hospitalizations, maybe not in the New York area as much as in some areas that have been running at very low rates so far. Now, one of the reasons that there is not the shortage of hospital beds that they had potentially projected, I think, is that there are very few hospital beds required for anything right now than the coronavirus patients. They've told people to put off their elective surgeries. And also, there are just very few emergency room cases from your typical Friday night, Saturday night activity in urban areas where there's, just people, I hate to say it, but people being shot, people being stabbed, some random violence in high crime areas. There are very few car accidents because people aren't driving around. and you have a lot of beds being freed up in all the hospitals because really nobody's going to the hospital for any other reason than a severe coronavirus situation.
I should have
been told not to, but just there are few societies being shut down, and there are few incidences happening that require hospitalization.
I should have uploaded the photos and the footage in New York City of just the bare streets for people who are used to seeing that city bustling. In the beginning, I think, and again, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but because we did talk about this Friday, but in the beginning, I think that there was, Mayor de Blasio, there were some statements from Mayor de Blasio, the head of the Department of Health over there, that in the beginning they weren't doing social distancing, and it took them a little bit of time. But again, there's plenty of time for criticism. Let's look at some of the positive stuff today. Italy and Spain are just now flattening their curve, right? Or that's the hope. That's the hope. We don't want to jump the gun here. Look at the ingenuity, and it's a real testament to American medicine. How, if New York is really headed in this trend, if this becomes a trend, how New York was able to basically get on the same page with some of these European countries that the outbreak was weeks ahead of us. Really consider that, Tim. And we're doing better testing. It's not just the number of tests. We're a bigger country. It's not just the number of tests. It's the quality. Our tests are better. That is, by the way, I think if there's any serious investigation, Adam Schiff talking about this already, but if there's any serious investigation into the handling of this response, it really does need to look at how that people are going to, probably go nuts over this, but it's true. That rule is there for a reason. There are thousands of tests that were sent to European countries that were made in China. They don't have the same kind of, restrictions and regulations that we have. In the end, did that not really pan out?
They had a big problem with that in Spain.
Right. And they had
a lot of
effective tests
in Spain, maybe that were only showing 60% accurate results. So a lot of false positives, a lot of false negatives.
A lot of false, right. And, it's just
probably a lot of false negatives.
This is why it requires, our country requires us to essentially make our own tests. And this is why I didn't get such seeing the effectiveness of our testing versus other countries. I guess it kind of informed why I wanted antibody testing sooner, but I also realized the importance of needing these things to be done correctly, because there were a bunch of them out there that were rapid response. Some of them are so easy. We looked at, you could do it at home. It's so simple. With the exception of, putting a couple of droplets of blood in a solution and then putting it on the test, very similar to a pregnancy test. But if it doesn't work, what good is it? Right. So, right. But I am very much, for me, the antibody testing is, it's preeminent here. We need to know the results of those antibodies. That is the difference between getting back to work and hiding in the house. Because again, when we all come out, this virus is still going to be there. And we need to know, number one, that ultimate denominator, we need to know that. And we also need to know, is it okay? Are you okay? Are you personally all right to go out? Because I know a lot, I don't know about you, this is just anecdotal, but I know a lot of people who think they probably had the coronavirus, weeks ago, and, just didn't get a test, or it wasn't big on the news yet, but the symptoms very similar. And you and I talked about this. I was sick for
if you had 2 weeks, and
I got my dad sick. I lost my sense of smell. I lost my sense of my taste. My palate was gone, and I couldn't. It was definitely what I thought was bronchitis or something, like like a bronchial infection, because there was pressure and congestion, but it wouldn't come up. It was like two weeks of this, and so I know a lot of people who tell me that as well. So I'm dying to see the results. I'm dying to see widespread antibody testing at this point. But again, we talked about hospitalizations, outpacing, but what time Cuomo comes on at 11? Maybe we'll take him a little bit.
I haven't seen it. He's typically been coming on around 11 or 11:30.
Maybe we'll pop in and we'll listen for a couple of minutes, because today is in Italy, we thought we saw the flattening of the curve before. So I don't want to get people's hopes but either way, it's still good news. But we had seen Italy go up, Italy flatten out a little bit and then pop back up again. Bob, reminds me of a bobber. If you fish, it reminds me of like a bobber that bounces
right,
up and down.
right.
But so it does take time to watch and see if this stuff pans out. But where we on one of the markets here, Tim? When's the last time we checked that? Where are we at?
Well, the Dow is up almost exactly 5%, up over 1,000 points above the 22,000 level. The S&P 500 is at the 2,600 level, and I think that's a good level for the S&P 500, because when we came off those lows that really spanned from March 18 to March 23, I really felt the first move for the S&P 500 would be to get into a 2,500 to 2,700 trading range. We had one close above 2,600 about a week ago, and I think that was on the Monday. I think that was a week ago Monday, and then we had really a just below 2,500. We closed last week, 3 days into a new month, a new quarter. But now, if we can hold these gains, most of these gains for the day, I think it will be a positive sign. Still not out of the woods yet. Still looking for some clarity on whether we can hold to this April 30 time frame on getting back to work. But more importantly than just getting back to work, I think there will need to be some behind the scenes staging activities pre-planned, so that just vital services and products that people use in their everyday life logistically is not going to be in short supply.
Yeah, and I think that's why we're seeing a lot of calls for a second task force, a coronavirus task force. I'll welcome anybody to that club. I mean, how many weeks have I been saying this, Tim? I mean, really, there should have been people there in place getting ready for this. But I look, Peter Navarro. If you're somebody who supports Donald Trump, you supported what he was doing on trade. You support his overall, bring a more nationalist agenda especially for factory sector. Then he's right there. And this would not, this poor guy, he's got like 3 or 4 hats already, but it wouldn't be hard for him to transition into something like that. And he's already been working with these companies. So he's already uniquely positioned, because I did see some calls, people saying that it should be a bipartisan task force. This is the Trump administration. It's not a bipartisan administration. I see no reason why it should be bipartisan. You wouldn't expect, if it was a Democratic president, you wouldn't expect a Democrat to go call, 2 or 3 Republican economists. That would just not happen. Right. And so that's number one. And number two, for the most part, Democrats have opposed Trump's pro-growth policies that have, it's important to note, like we're talking about the economy rebounding. It's the real economy I've always been worried about. I've not really been too worried about the market. The market will follow. It's a leading indicator, but I mean, it will follow, what it thinks will happen in the actual real economy. So this obviously is a sign today that it feels like we're having some light at the end of the tunnel. But in the end, I was always worried about the real economy. And as far as who would be on this task force, there are people that are there now already. Maybe the right answer, and I don't know. I mean, the president, contrary to the criticisms, he knows this. He knows this economy better than really anybody, Tim. I mean, he knows what needs to happen, is my point. So me shouting on Twitter and other people criticizing the guy, he's obviously doing this because he thinks he has to say he's saving lives. He's not doing it because he doesn't understand the risk to the economic situation of tens of millions of Americans and the fundamentals, but they believe the fundamentals are there, So at some point, maybe the right thing to do is just shift people that are already there and familiar. And Pence is familiar with, this is not a guy who's economically illiterate. Navarro, I mean, he's been leading the charge into this. if we, like we talked about on Friday, if he's going to take this moment to actually seize this moment to do some of what he's been talking about for decades, which is bring some of these sectors back, now would be a great time to do it. And Peter Navarro would be the person to put it in charge of that, is my point.
And I think you would, if there is such a task force, I think you would have some technical, logistical experts involved also. You may see a couple people with a military background. You've seen them starting to work their way into the situation already. I think that will be downplayed by the administration, but frankly, the military does logistics at a very complicated level.
Yeah, they sure do.
Better than anyone else in the world. So it would make sense to have a couple of those people involved. You may see someone from the railroad industry, someone from the trucking industry, maybe someone from the Federal Express or UPS, and maybe someone from, some of the major retailing organizations out there. So it's a slightly different skill set of people than what you've had really directing a lot of the activities, certainly for the medical part of it.
Oh, right. Yeah. Just to be clear, the Dr. Birx, and, I've said this, I'm very impressed with this woman, but there is a point, where the focus has to shift. And while Pence and Navarro have like overlapped with this effort, there's some overlapping duties there. They wear multiple hats, and they have the ability to look at different disciplines in a broader. The medical people, at that point, Tim, they would have already had their turn and their say, and that would be a wrap for them.
It's not to
continue to do what you're doing, but for the economic side of it, I don't see what. Unless, of course, you want to consult with them, which is, I would like to see. I mean, Tim, if we could put water fountains all over the place, we could put I'm over here thinking about, because this will happen again. And I'm over here thinking about things that we could do for the future. Trump wants an infrastructure bill. And he says, now's the time to do it. It's the cheap, it's just like it is the cheapest time for us to buy a home. It is definitely the cheapest time for government to borrow, and the interest is so low. Not that I'm advocating for borrowing trillions of more dollars, but I'm saying it is a good time to borrow because it costs almost nothing. If you can put water fountains in big cities everywhere, Tim, you can put hand washing stations outside of places. I mean, talk about the new norm. The new norm. Why should we have to live with a new norm outside of simple behavior modifications like that? So, there's no difference. We're talking about, and speaking of logistics, we're talking about plumbing. That's the challenge here, right? So we're talking about public plumbing. There's really no difference there than water fountains. So I don't see why in and out of, you work in New York City, in and out of certain areas, it would be prudent to have hand washing, just like there's not a million people lined up to use the water fountains anymore. There's not, it would just become part of our day-to-day, and we get smarter, and we would understand whether or not now's the appropriate or smart time to do it. I'm just trying to think outside the box here, because this is going to happen again. And for those of you who've got kids, how sad is it to watch your children basically lose out their entire, especially if you have hardworking kids that have been breaking their butts at school, and they get good grades, they're working towards a goal, and this was just swept away from them. We can't do this all the time, is my point. We can't allow them to do this to us every time, whether it was whether we're talking an intentional effort or we're talking about carelessness, we have to make sure that we're going to be all right during these times. We can't crash the economy. We can't get our kids left behind another grade every time the Chinese unleash a pathogen on the population. This is not feasible. We just can't do it. We have to start thinking outside the box. And that should be part of that task force, by the way. That's my point. That was the circle back from that big rant. That was my point. We need to start thinking a little bit more outside the box. What do you think about that? I mean, you don't hear these ideas.
You don't hear them right now, but I think when we get closer to the end of April, you'll hear a lot of things like that. I would hope that you would.
Yeah, I would
You
as
know?
well. I mean, at this point, yeah, at this point, there's have got to be a bunch of really smart people whose job it is to do this. And I'm a little bit shocked that there hasn't been. And I'm not, this is not to blame, again, I'm not blaming anybody for this. This is just sometimes government, it doesn't do what you might think is common sense until there's a problem like this. And then
Well, I think they've had a single focus of beating the virus.
yeah, right, of course.
And I just think that we are maybe just now see a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. And if that would become a little bit more clear, then I think you'll see a lot of people start to focus on, okay, what do we do once it's clear that we're coming out of this?
Right.
And
right.
it's not going to take, it's not going to take months to plan for, what we do to have everybody go back and live their life as normally as they can, but also build in some precautionary measures in case we get a second wave.
Right.
And if you have confidence that one or two of the medications that they're currently testing quite a bit is going to be effective, then that will go a long way toward accomplishing that.
What do you make of, again, since the last time we spoke, we spoke and did this show, since that time, again, with Fauci, but I think he was Brian Kilmeade I was watching interview him, and he asked him about hydroxychloroquine, and he just completely put the kibosh on it. I mean, he just poo-pooed it. I mean, I
didn't catch that interview, but I've also seen interviews with him where he's said that, look, it's shown some promise in some unscientific studies.
And that's what he said, basically, that it's a small study. And,
which is true.
It is true. But there are multiple small studies now.
And he is a scientist, and he's not going to be convinced of it until it's proven to be effective and not harmful. But also on the other side of that, it's a drug that's been around for a long time that does have some side effects potentially with some people with some very specialized ailments, but generally does not have widespread health concerns. I think the bigger health concern would be if it was prescribed in combination with a Z-Pak.
Yeah.
My understanding is there are some people that should avoid the Z-Pak if you have, and again, I don't know the details of it at all, but if you have a weak heart, a Z-Pak can pose some problems.
I was just going to say that since Friday, when we were talking about the danger of an arrhythmia, I did call somebody and ask about, lucky to have a huge medical community here. That's really, I mean, that's almost the dominant sector of the economy here, aside from academia, where we are. But basically it's people, it's the combination is especially, the risk factors, and there's a risk to everything. And taken separately, these drugs have been, around for a while and have been used, but there are certain patients that, especially in combination, there's a danger of arrhythmia there. But again, like we did speak about on Friday, I mean, there's some patients that are at risk of death, Tim. So, it's a tough call, and it's a call that each doctor and patient has to make together. All right, give me 2 seconds. Let's go through this, and then I will get to it. I see my DMs going. They're like, "Oh, you're going to talk about the voters' files." We'll circle back to the coronavirus, and by the time I'm done, maybe I just want to give them a sneak peek into what it looks like, and they can understand what I'm talking about all the time. And
definitely.
And machine learning, some of these things I want to explain to people, what it means when the model infers somebody is something. So anyway, these are questions I repeatedly get, but it's almost 10:30. Let's go through the routine. So normally Monday through Thursday, this will stream on PPD, and you'll have to catch it on PPD, and then Fridays on YouTube. But we decided to just run this on YouTube this week because it's kind of a freewheeling. Everybody's home. People need something to do. But then when we get back into the grind, we'll put this Monday through Thursday on PPD. So if you want to support it, go and subscribe, because you will hit that paywall. Eventually, if you're looking on the site Monday through Thursday, you'll hit that paywall. If you don't want to make them monthly, you could just get credits if you just want to watch a single show. But that's how to support us. Don't donate. We've been through this a million times now. Go get some value for your money. All right. So go to ppdnews.us/subscribe. And if you want to support us, that's how you can do it. All right, let me circle back here. Let me get rid of this other chart, or I'll keep that other one up actually. But and I'm not going to hit the button until we get to this page, Tim, because I want people to see. Some people always say to me, "Well, where'd you get this? How did you get?" I'm going to show them exactly what I'm doing. Mouse click by mouse click, and then they can see where this is coming from. And we talked about the term last week, oversampling, or really the misuse of this term. When I show these things on Twitter or where else we write articles about them, it's not necessarily that the pollster is wrong. If for instance, party identification doesn't line up, that's a matter for their voter model. My point is to show the likelihood that they're wrong, and then also, the modeling doesn't just show you the raw number for people. It does know voting history, okay? And it will tell whether or not a voter is likely to vote. Sometimes a voter will tell us they're not at all likely to vote, but I know they're going to vote because I've looked and they've been voting in the last 20 years worth of elections on every level, whether it's the presidential level, the primary level. And so I know that they're just full of it and they're gassing me. And sometimes a voter will say they're absolutely certain to vote, but this voter may be inactive, or meaning they have not voted in so long that they're classified as inactive. All right. And then also too, if I remember, Tim, Texas probably would be a good place to do this. I want to explain to people, everybody always asks me, how many people are on the voter rolls that shouldn't be on the voter rolls? Okay. I want to show people the difference between when we actually go in there. Let's say I want to poll, and I'm going to pull a random sample from the voter files to call up on their cell phones or to call up on their landlines. And I'm trying to find people that I believe personally shouldn't be in the voting population. It's basically a default that will exclude recent movers and dead people. You'd think that's common sense. But a state like Texas is a great place to show you the difference when you don't. Okay. All right. So let's do this. Let me pull this up, drag it on over, and then I'll show people. Let's start with Florida. Okay. This is a cardinal sin, by the way, folks. All right. You just don't do this in the business. You don't show people this stuff. All right. I don't know why, but you don't. And I probably have to zoom in a little bit here just so you guys can see it. All right, so that's a little bit better. Let me look at how you see it so I can get a better feel from everybody. This is Florida, okay? This is a database, and the database is hundreds of millions. It's 145 million, I think, at this point, 149 million, right? So when you compare them to actual voter registration statistics, if, for instance, if you didn't read the article I did on Florida, you'll see how accurate it really is. Florida's been tracking partisan affiliation since 1972. So they have, and it's updated monthly, as are these, by the way. So you would be able to compare them. And if you go on PPD, you would see that article if you search for it. And it was an article on why Donald Trump, like I said on Friday, would be incredibly difficult to beat. All right. And let's see if I can pull this, make this a little bit bigger. I can't make this bigger for you guys. This really stinks. There we go. Here we go. All right. So here's Florida. All in all, there are about a little over 13 million people that are on the rolls in Florida that are what are called unique individuals. All right. Let's just run this by itself, and I'll show you what it breaks down to. Okay. This just has party, gender, household income, marital status, inferred ethnicity. All right. So here we go. So you see it's about D+2, a little less than, a little bit more than D+2. And that is the raw, meaning everybody that's, that's in there, whether the only thing I did exclude here are dead people, as you can see here, and recent movers, people who have left the state, they moved to another state, and they should not really be on the voter files anymore. Okay. And it tells me, the database tells me how many landlines there are, how many mobile lines there are, how many emails there are. This is how we build up the panels at Big Data Poll. So we get these emails and we actually invite people to take part in the panel. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It's a numbers game. All right. More often they don't, of course. But again, the point is Democrats here are about 37% of the electorate. That's real. If you go and look at the Florida Secretary of State voter registration statistics, you will see how accurate this is. Okay. And there's your Republican number right here, for instance. A lot of third parties in Florida and nuns, which we broke down in that article to show you, because I think it's about 3 or 4 years, Tim, where Florida wasn't breaking this up specifically. It's been about 3 or 4 years, and they're much more specific with their data now. So we've always been able to see it on our end, but it's kind of hard to, compare to the secretary's office if they're not actually putting those numbers up. All right. And Florida is a little bit more, the female voters are about 54% of the population. That's typically what that breaks down to on election day, by the way. They just happen to be the reason why that doesn't hurt Republicans as much as you might think is that particularly older, probably 45 and older, I would say, and especially white are very, they're more conservative than the rest of the country. Broken down. All right. So I want to show you this though. This is the raw. So when you get it, and you guys are all always asking me these questions about polls that may have a larger representation. Remember, the term is not oversample. They are overrepresented. Maybe one or the other party has a larger advantage than you think is realistic. It is possible that one party is just more willing to vote or excited to vote than the other. A good example, in 2012, Barack Obama's voters were very excited. Mitt Romney actually carried independents. He just still lost because Democrats came out stomping to the polls. There was a very minor swing in 2018 away from Republicans among unaffiliated voters and independents and third parties, but they don't swing that much in Florida historically. So the Republican turnout was so strong that it was able to overcome that modest swing. Okay. And I want to show you something. So let's say it's micro target. Okay. And let's say we want to let's do vote history. That's a much better for what we're talking about. Let's say the propensity score. Okay. Let's say we're looking for a general election and we want to know whether or not they're at least half likely. So when we ask the polling question, we'll say tell us whether you are likely to vote or not. And the question will be highly likely, meaning you are certain that you will vote. Very likely, meaning that the chances are, and depends how you want to word this, but we typically say, meaning the odds are greater than 50-50. And then less or not likely, meaning the odds are less than 50-50. So this is how and the reason why we do that is because of how the voter files, it's just easier to match. All right. And I don't want Laura to pull me by the ear later and say, why are you giving up all these secrets? I just want people to understand what goes into a likely voter model. Okay. Let's just say the value is above 50. All right. Now it's going to recount, and it's doing this based on their voting history. It returned a sample of about 4 million people where it can give me a higher certainty, a higher likelihood that it can return true information to me, statistics. Okay, let's do it again. And this is this is running now, and it's going to spit out everything we saw before. Only it's going to recalculate it. Okay, now look at the difference. Look at the difference in party affiliation. What this is telling me Now, 40 Republicans are now 46% of the sample, while Democrats are about 37.5%. You will notice that Democrats didn't really move all that much, did they? They only moved a few points. And that is because while we have those outliers like 2012, all in all, we're going to see Republicans vote at a higher rate than Democrats in the state of Florida. Okay. And that's too small for you to really be able to see. Let's pop Tim back in here. All right, there we go. So you're basically, all in all, you have your obvious anomalies, folks. But for the most part, Republicans down here are older, retired, or workers. It may take them until the end of the day to get out there and vote. But that's why we always see those. It's not just the early vote counts, because Republicans vote heavy absentee ballot down here. So it's not just that Democrats bank those votes. They are counted in the order in which the precincts report and in order of which these votes were cast. It will go absentee ballots first, then in-person early, and then election day. So that's why we always see these huge margins for Democrats run up. And then, which we used to nickname the red wave, which includes the panhandle, but it's also the order in which votes are counted. We know from their likelihood to vote that those votes are going to come in after. So Democrats, they got to run it up the best they can, and then try to enough to be able to blunt the late reporting votes that are going to come in from Republicans. And it's a little bit different than how it is in the rest of the country. Yes, Republicans typically do better on election day, but there's more going into it down here than and I'm trying to show you that right now. The difference between what the share of the electorate that Republicans make up in just the raw voter registration versus the share of the electorate that they make up when you target them based on who's most likely to vote. And we can see that if we just go, we can even break it down by percentages. And we could say maybe turnout status, maybe they're 30% likely. So basically you could do it how you want to do it. All right. And then you know what, Tim? I bet you even in Florida, if I was to update this right now, it's going to recount it. And it's going to say about 14 million and change. Unique individuals, about 13 million. And the reason why this is higher, these are actual records. It's a record count. So it'll tell you how many specific unique individuals it counted. And that the difference between those numbers, and that same is true when you get into landlines, mobile phones, emails. The difference in those numbers is, like Laura and I, we're both registered to vote, but we live in the same household, obviously. So let's look and see. Remember that number, Tim, about 13,002,500. Let's get rid of deceased. Florida is usually pretty good. Texas is a much better case study in this, and that's what I wanted to show you. So if you're looking at a really close election, Rick Scott, 10,000 votes. Having 10,000 people move out of the state is probably not a good idea, right? And keeping them on their rolls, right? Or deceased. And then same thing if you were to X out change of address flag, it'll probably bump up. It's just we're getting more people than we're losing. But wow, look at the difference in that number. That jumped from a little over 13 million to 14, almost 14.5 million, 14.3 million. That's a big difference. So when we talk about the importance of cleaning our rolls, this is why. It's very important. You can leave a lot of records on there questioning the integrity of elections cannot be done in a society that self-governs. The whole thing falls apart. All right. But Texas is an even better case study in this. If you look at we got about a little under 15 million. Let's go to vote history. Or actually, before I do that, look at the analysis. Texas is a great example, too, of how Republicans vote in much higher numbers. In order for Democrats to take the state, they really need to overwhelmingly win independents, and they need Republicans to hiccup. So basically, this is a very large number of unknowns. And when you just look at the broadest population possible, Republicans actually, and this is inferred, meaning we know from other behaviors whether or not they're going to vote Republican or Democrat. And basically, it's very close. But if we decide we want to just look at people who voted in a general election, for instance, or voted early even here, I don't want to play it. That's too much. I'm trying to keep this simple. Let's look at a voter propensity score. They voted in a presidential election, and they're at least 70%, or let's do 50-50 again, just to keep with the same example as Florida. All right. Let it load up, do its thing. And then I'll show you guys when we run the report again, what the difference now is between Republican share and the Democratic share. And this is why for Democrats, it's always a challenge for them to get their certain areas of their base out, which, younger people. Now, here we go. Now, here we see it's about 50%, a little bit over. I would say it's probably in the mid 40s to high 40s for something that's a little bit more realistic. That's why if we were really doing a tight screen, we would raise that 50% threshold. I'm just trying to show you for the sake of simplicity here. And that would bring Republicans down to probably 45%, around that. But it goes to show you how difficult it really is for a Democrat to carry Texas statewide, because they need to trounce the Republican among they need the political stars to align. They need to trounce the Republican candidate among independents, and then they need their base to come out in the same measure that Republicans are going to come out, if not more, really more, in a state like Texas. So again, I hope you guys find this and you understand what I'm trying to do here and how I'm trying to explain, because all these questions we get, and I'm trying to explain the difference. And you really, as a pollster, they just have to feel this out. So that's the importance of a tighter screen, at least in my philosophy. Everybody has a different philosophy, but in our philosophy, we like tighter screens, because the difference between 10 and 5% likelihood could make all the difference in the world in an election. If you're off by a few points, we use the example of Wisconsin on Friday. If you're off by a few points, and you were projecting the electorate to be D+2, then you're going to be not just wrong if the electorate turns out to be R+1, but you're going to be very wrong. And Wisconsin, let's look at that. With the voting propensity score, we know that Wisconsin is roughly, and actually, oh good, it does get rid of it. Good, automatically. Usually I'm moving so fast, Tim, I don't really, take heed to what it does, normally. But so about 5.3 million voters. Run the analysis. And this is what I showed you guys on Twitter last week. And this is what Big Data Poll puts out every quarter. Okay. So now here we go. And sometimes it's going to vary from time. It depends on what, the parameters that I put in. But this is the overall population. You have almost over a 4-point, almost nearly, if it was another 1/10 of a percentage point, it would be R+5. Again, that poll showed Donald Trump actually carrying independents slightly. The only way, the reason why he was down in that Marquette poll, Tim, is because he was doing poorly among Republicans. So here's why I say that if that doesn't hold up, and we see Republicans vote for him at the same rates we've been seeing in the primary, and he wins independents by 1 to 3 points, whatever it may be, it's not really, at this point, we're beyond the ideas of, discussions over whether the polling is going to be right or not. It's irrelevant at this point. And when we model, we don't really take the top lines and put them into the model. We take the breaks. And this is why, because we need to know whether there's a mean spread between for instance, it's this president, but I'm talking about with others as well. Whether or not they're going to win 90% of their base or 92% of their base, and which way independents are breaking. It's almost irrelevant for us what the top line is for a specific pollster. We almost don't care, folks, because they could be and have been quite a bit wrong. So again, I hope people found this educational, Tim. We got a couple of minutes, and I'd like to get back to regular discussion here. But I hope people understand where I'm going with this, because now what I want them to be able to do is those questions that they're asking me. I want them, if they watch this show constantly, I want them to get a grasp themselves when they look at a poll, and they can have a better. Now they're not going to see voter files like we do. They're not going to be able to verify that by opening them up. But at least they can get a better grasp on what assumptions either that pollster made that could or could not be right, or if they weren't assumptions, how they collected that data to, so what made you come up with this party split? And this has been where I'm a critic with polling. I want to know what made you come up with that split. There is no reason. Now, some pollsters will tell you that this is a proprietary model and it's in kind of our business plan and we can't tell you about it. Well, then you shouldn't publicly poll, right?
Right.
Where did you come up with how did you come up with 34, 32, whatever, if you included third parties or not, or just independents? How did you come up with that? Which place did you get your data from? I just shared my screen with everybody, obviously. I use the biggest voter file source out there. Where did this come from? Where did you pull those records from? And what is in your screening model that allowed you to come, that where you arrived at this, when we know the voter files say this? And again, registration does not make an electorate, but we can, at this point, technology has so advanced, Tim. I don't need, in many respects, and I've shown this to you time and time again, we don't need to know or ask a voter, to confirm what we see. Did you vote in the last election or not? You'd be surprised how many voters will say yes, and they didn't. All right. Are you, and again, like the example I used before, whether or not they're likely or not to vote. A lot of older people like to be funny, especially older people in Florida and in New Hampshire. That's another one that's really tricky. They'll tell you, no, I'm not going to vote. I'm not going to vote. And I look, and it's Dolores. She's 72, and she has voted in every election since she turned 18. Dolores is lying to me, but without the technology, you can't confirm that. And we have to expect pollsters to give us more information is where I'm going with this.
Yeah, I would certainly think that there would be my just instinctive reaction to that would be there would be more people that would say they definitely are going to vote and then don't vote for whatever reason than people who say, oh no, I usually don't vote, blah, blah, blah. It just doesn't mean anything to me. It's only one vote. How does it matter? And they voted in every election in their life. I would think that would be I would think that the Dolores example would be the outlier.
And there's a lot of young people on the flip side of that. There's a lot of young people who will tell you, I'm going to vote, but they won't. They won't. And this is why, too, I've been a big fan of the panels, the online panels. And you know what? Remind me, I should upload those graphics for another show, and we should show them the results of that. I can now it's not even debatable. We can show you using the partner I just showed you and an online panel partner that the panels that we recruited from the voter files and tracked and put onto online panels, they voted at higher rates than people who picked up the phone and talked to you in a poll. They voted at higher rates than the overall file. Of course, that just makes sense. But they were a more representative, as long as you collect it and it's representative of each subgroup. I mean, it goes a lot that goes into that. But when you're recruiting and building these panels, as long as they're representative of the greater population, they voted in the last two elections at higher rates than other data collection modes. So in other words, those voters in 2016 that said they didn't vote or they didn't vote in 10 years, Tim. They haven't voted in 10 years or more.
Right.
And when we asked them, who are you going to vote for? It was, he clobbered her among these voters. It was ugly. Some days was, high 60s advantage. Some days was low 80s. It was, and I mean, it was a clobbering, and we saw a lot of those voters in North Carolina. There were a lot actually down here in Florida too. There were, and by the way, she got more votes out of Broward County than Obama did when he beat Mitt Romney. So, so that those voters were key to him being able to hold back, those big chunks of votes, but again, I mean, this is where it's easier to mess up, in my opinion, with those younger voters because they're harder to tell whether or not maybe they didn't vote, but with Obama, for instance, they really liked the guy and they went out there and they voted for him, even though some traditional pollsters would have crossed them off the list. They're not coming out, but they did. But they did, whereas opposed to maybe they would have said they were going to vote for Hillary, but they didn't. They didn't, they just didn't show.
Right.
And so we got Cuomo up here yet. I really was trying to cover it, but
I don't see him yet.
You don't see him yet? Okay.
No.
Well, I mean, let me put out a little question call, but
look, sometimes they go to it right at, just as he's sitting down. It's not like they're going to show the podium or the table that he's speaking from 10 minutes before he starts.
Right. And I hope he did good these last 2 days. I know I was critical of him, and I said that he was being vague, in some of his report, and he was. But these last couple of days, he did do really well. I got to be honest. Maybe that's because he's a little bit more upbeat. You could tell he was like cautiously optimistic, the last couple of days. He wants to be happy, but at the same time, if you were him, would you be? No, you would wait. And we've seen this in other countries. Italy looked like it had turned a corner a week and a half ago, and it didn't. Spain's the same way. So you don't want to jump up and down for joy too early, but at the same time, you could see he was having a difficult time holding back his optimism, or at least a little bit, some sense of relief. And talking about hospitalizations, like you brought up before, it also didn't hurt that Trump came in there and helped him with beds, right? And he sent the Navy chip, the Army Corps of Engineers. So
the last thing you want to think is that, oh my God, I've only got 175 beds left, and then I'm maxed out.
Right. Yeah, and every little bit counts. We were talking about logistics before. You are so right when it comes to the. I mean, I was in the Army. They're an impressive machine. Impressive machine. Nobody does logistics. U.S. military, yes, in general, but I'm talking about on the ground logistics. I wasn't a sailor. I wasn't an airman. I really can't speak to that. But on the ground logistics, nobody does it better than the United States Army. They just, and then somebody talking about putting together like a dream team for a reopening the economy task force. Then the military, these people know what they're doing. And then the other point you made before I meant to say was like a FedEx or something, somebody from FedEx or these guys. Everybody's got their own personal favorite, but somebody from UPS would, I'm sure, do well as well.
Right.
I personally like FedEx better, but that was a really good point. That was out of the box thinking right there, because these guys, and this is the time when some of these companies want to get on the Fed's good side. They want to be on the Fed's good side. They do not want to make an enemy right now. They don't want to come back later and have Peter Navarro say, you know what, like 3M. If I was 3M, I'd be a little bit worried right now, or at least not worried right now, worried for maybe down the line. Navarro said it was like pulling teeth with GM, pulling teeth. And then they go on these shows and they say, we're doing everything we can do. And it's hard to discern who's really telling the truth. Right. But that would be. And
Cuomo
Trump
presser is at 11:30 today.
11:30
scheduled for 11:30.
All right, we'll see.
We'll see how accurate that is.
Yeah, by the time Cuomo starts, he may actually, we may be done. Sometimes they're just late, but with Trump, he ran.
His have been fairly timely.
Yeah, he has.
Right.
He has, and again, I think he does a good. They're almost like his own reality. It's almost like the Cuomo show out there. Everybody mocks Donald Trump for it, but he has fun with it. Did you see him and his brother? Like a week and a half ago or whatever? It was early last week. Did you see him with Chris? That was. Yeah. I got to be honest. I was amused by that. First of all, lived in Jersey for a while, but I'm from New York. That reminded me of me and my brother. I was chuckling because it reminded me of how we used to talk to each other, and to really would still do. But
Right.
it was
Right.
a funny New York Italian exchange between brothers. It was very typical, but funny stuff. So he's got his own Cuomo show over there too. Certainly didn't help. Couldn't hurt CNN, to
Right.
see his right.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
but Trump ran on putting together these dream teams, and I wanted to circle back to that to say that because that was a good point. Going back and getting these guys who do this, who do it the best. And in this case, you can find them in the government, or at least in the military. Military is a well-oiled machine, and it's also probably the most progressive institution. And I mean progressive in the real sense of the word. Society trails. When it look, gay marriage, for instance, it was don't ask, don't tell for years. But of course, when you're serving with somebody, or maybe you don't. It's not really the point. The point is whether the guy or girl does their job. And in the military, everybody, in my sense, everybody was green. It doesn't really matter. It was predominantly a Christian army when I was in. I don't know what it's like now, but I was not a spiritual guy when I joined. And they make you a spiritual guy because, well, not make you, but like they say, there's no atheist in a foxhole, Tim. There's no atheist in a foxhole. And those guys, you just see they're salt of the earth people, and or at least the guys that I knew, they were just great people. I mean, communities like that. I think, with veterans, that's one of the biggest problems veterans have when they get out is that the people, they're so good. And maybe the civilian world just doesn't have that kind of, friendships and community. So it's you when you get out, it's tough. It's hard to find that. So that was for me. That was an example. And my other friends, I was lucky though. I had a friend who got out roughly the same time. So we whined and complained to each other until moving on with our lives. We had each other to complain about, but some, I know other guys don't, All right. Well, it's 11:01. Let me do my spiel.
Go.
Let me do my half-hour spiel. All right. So we're going to run this show Monday through Friday on YouTube this week. We'll see. We'll take it. Let's see what the economy looks like next week and whether everybody's sitting at home again. But we figured everybody was home. And since we really just started and we're at a skeleton, let's just run it and give people a chance to watch it, but then Monday through Thursday, it will be on PPD. So, and Friday will be like an open freebie Friday and we'll take questions. All right. So, and we'll always, if you send me questions now on Twitter, like I'm getting right now, I'll try to answer them. And I hope I did with the voter file stuff. If there's any questions you have and you want to circle back, I will I'm peeking on my Twitter. So if you didn't understand something of what I went over before, want me to elaborate on something else, I will. But if you want to support the show, just subscribe to PPD. Don't, like I said, we're going to, I think that's going to be a catchphrase over here. Get some data for your dollar, so go and subscribe, ppdnews.us/subscribe. That's how you could support the show if you want to support the show. We're not going to do a Patreon or anything like that. Just go and subscribe. So anyway, it's 11:03. So that was the quick. I'm doing that one quick and we're skipping back here because time flies. Time flies when you're doing this. When I do interviews, on other people's shows, it's 10 minutes or a 15-minute segment feels like nothing. They'll ask you 3 questions and it's over. But when I'm shocked that when you're doing this, it also flies right by. It also does. So give us a little bit on the hour market update. All right. And I'm gonna look at Twitter to see if there's any questions people want me to answer.
The Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ pretty much in lockstep, all up just less than 4.5%. The Dow is right at that 22,000 level. The NASDAQ's right at the 7,700 level. I would love to see the NASDAQ, maybe if we get any momentum behind this, kind of get into the 7,800, 8,200 trading range. Now that would be a big move
Looks like Tim popped out, so I'm popping back in until he jumps in. But I am reading questions, and they're good. So I was hoping he would do that for a little bit while I had a chance to read questions. But yeah,
I
he'll
lost my
be back
stream
in
for a
here.
sec.
Oh,
Yeah, I lost
you
my
bumped
stream for
out.
a
You want to
second. I'm
finish?
sorry. Yeah,
I'll answer a question when you're done. Go ahead, take it.
So if ideally, I'd like to see NASDAQ get into the 7,800, 8,200 trading range. That would be a good level for that to hang out in, maybe through the end of April. But we would need to get some clear visibility on, okay, the end of April, big chunks of people are going back to work.
And we have a pretty dead day today on the economic calendar.
Right.
I like yearn for these big economic calendar days now. I do. And when I'll always check to see what, work the week's got ahead, so I'll always look at the over the weekend, and I'll peek at it. I can't stand seeing the days where we got nothing but a treasury auction or something.
And the only downside to that right now is that so much of this economic data is just going to be, it's just not going to mean a lot, because we're not talking about a real economy right now. We're talking about an economy that's shut down. And I mean, and you can get estimates from people for Q2 GDP that range anywhere from down 6 to 8% to down 25 to 30%. And really, the people's models are, they might say, well, I put some data in my model. Yeah, but you're making up the data because you just don't know what it's going to be. It's just, it's really just educated guesses, almost a dart throwing exercise if you're coming up with GDP forecast for the second quarter.
That's what I wouldn't even put you on the spot to say, where do you think we're going to end up with GDP? But I mean, some of these ranges, which is why, by the way, on PPD, that's what we do. When it comes to forecasts, it's essentially like when you go and look at the Wall Street Journal or Reuters or something. Even Fox does this too, Fox Business, which I think they do a pretty good job, but they'll say it missed the forecast, or it matched the forecast, or it beat the forecast. That's their forecast. It's like a poll, So we always do, and I know other companies you can get this from. Briefing is one Tim likes. I like Econo Day. And we aggregate the forecasts that the Wall Street Journal has a forecast. Reuters will have a forecast. And even better, Wall Street economists have a forecast, which I care more about than any of the media forecast. I mean, truth be told, when I'm looking at the forecast range, I'm always looking to see who's that high end, who's that low end, because sometimes these guys, and you get to you get a feel, where so and so may be right, or on the flip side of that, that's just so and so, and you'll ignore a low or high end of that forecast. That's just the way I am. Not ignore it; it goes in the thing, But I'm taking it with a grain of salt, and so that's why we do that on PPD when we give these economic indicators, because the consensus forecast was, and the forecast range from a low of to a high of. That should be the standard in economic reporting. It really should.
Well, look, when you get a forecast in the Wall Street Journal, or if you get a forecast on a business financial news network, that is pretty much a consensus that comes from anywhere from 10 to 25 economists being polled, submitting their forecasts, and maybe they'll throw out a couple of outliers. But that's really an aggregation of a forecast from a number of different economists. And clearly, some are going to be much closer than others, but you'll have the average will usually be somewhere in the ballpark. Although we certainly had situations early in the year where the forecast for job gains beat expectations for solidly for 2 or 3 months in a row before the virus took over. So a lot of people made a big thing about, well, the market's selling off on Friday. This was last Friday. we did our show, of course, in the morning, but the market sold off because of the job losses were so much more than expected. I just really don't think that that's the case, because everybody knows that the real job losses for March were probably even much larger than what was reported, because the survey week took place in the second week in March.
Big media,
and that's why you get revisions. The reason you get these revisions that sometimes are not that meaningful, this time they will be very meaningful. Is a lot of these economic projections are from surveys of businesses. And then when the raw data comes in, you will get a much more accurate picture.
That's why I really paid attention to, and I don't want to butcher your name, Abu, so I'm going to leave out the last name, but I really paid attention to that comment from the ADP report released before the employment situation from the government, because, it was a warning. Look, this only went up until the 12th, I think, ADP, whatever it is. Yeah. So it was only a loss of about 25,000. And this time, the big media, to take the point you were saying before, they have a way of overly simplifying things all the time that drive me crazy. They'll say the market's up and down because of this. Do you remember when the market at its biggest point rally a couple of weeks ago, it notched the biggest point rally in history? Yeah. The media across the board, from Fox to MSNBC, reported that as the reason was that basically Congress was getting closer to the deal on the stimulus. And now we know that's not really true, because first of all, it was because Trump went to the microphone and said, I want to open up the economy again. Yes. That's why it went to the moon, folks. Okay. Right. And then when it realized it wasn't going to happen, you saw some good old fashioned. Yeah. We had good old fashioned profit taking and a sell off from, just pessimism from Trump not looking like he wasn't going to get his way, or maybe it was a little too rosy. Basically these revisions will be, I have to agree with that, they will matter this time. You and I will mention them to each other, putting together these reports or talking about a report. I'll ask you for a comment on something, shed some light on something, and you and I will talk about it. But it's not really something that gets brought up in the conversation, So, in an article, I mean, there's always revisions down at the bottom of the article, but it's not something that's really, there's not a spotlight on it. And there will be this time. And I think even big media will do that. They'll say, now that we have more data from the initial household survey, there was a lot more lost in March than we thought. And there will be. That's going to happen. The forecast, by the way, the high end, like I said, we always give a range. The high end was over 1 million, and the low end was actually a gain. I don't remember who that was, but that would be funny. But they were being a little rosy, thinking, and it wasn't that they were horrible and they missed out. It's just they were thinking for that reporting period, we could have, for instance, have seen a huge month of job creation, maybe 300, 350, but there were losses in that reporting period of 200,000. So that's where they came up with their forecast of a gain of 150, because they were foreseeing a big month of job creation, which was going to be offset. And you know what? I just want to tell somebody, I am going to circle back, expat. That was a really good question. He asked me about the hubbub that's been made about Trump's inroads with minority voters. And I'll say this about this. I myself remember, and I remember showing it to you. I remember when we polled, it was a national survey. Then it was about a year and a half ago, probably at this point. It was during Mother's Day weekend. We polled from Friday, and I think Mother's Day was Sunday or Monday. It was one of the,
Well, it's on a Sunday usually.
It's usually on a Sunday.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that's right. I remember the poll should have been done that Sunday. And look, just for ladies, I don't know when Father's Day is, and I got 3 kids. They come up to me and they're like, "Daddy, happy Father's Day," and I'm like, "Is it?" I just don't know. Just for the record, I don't not appreciate you. Oh boy. And yeah, so in any event, I remember polling up until Mother's Day and thinking, we're done. We got about 1,100 responses or something like that. I think it's representative. I think we're good. And then we were crunching the numbers, and Trump's approval among Black African Americans, among Black voters, was almost 20%, roughly about 20, I think it was 2021 or something like that. And I said to myself, that was the first time that we picked up his increase among Black voters. And I said, we're not done. I'm running this poll for Tuesday or Monday it was, and I think I skipped over one day because of the holiday. And I said, just to make sure this isn't statistical noise, let's refire the channels on Monday and go again. Because I just didn't, it's not that I didn't believe it. It's, I'll listen to the American people, when they tell me something, but I had to make sure it could absolutely have been statistical noise. So anyway, we did, and it ended up roughly, there was no statistical noise. It was pretty consistent across 3 or 4 days of data collection. How being in the field is what you'll usually hear people refer to it as. That being said, I do think Trump will it's almost, for me anyway, in my mind, it's almost it's highly likely that if the economy rebounds before the election, and again, like we spoke about on Friday, it doesn't really matter if we get that GDP number or not. If it's pretty clear the economy is going to pack on 1 million jobs a month, or so, that could happen, Tim. Because easily. And if it's rocking like that, and wages are 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, whatever, even 2.9 around that 3 mark. If that's going to happen, then in my mind, it's almost certain Donald Trump is going to add to his percentages with both Black and Hispanic voters. The Hispanic voters actually, I find it interesting because at the same time that he was losing educated whites during the collusion hoax, he was adding working Hispanics.
Right.
It was so weird. It was the craziest thing I've ever seen. Donald Trump's a really interesting person to poll or to. It's cool to be in this business during the era of Donald Trump. As people who know me know, I like crazy projects. I am a bit sick of asking, do you approve or disapprove of the job so-and-so is doing as president, senator, Congress, governor? It gets monotonous, folks. And I like different things. So the era of Donald Trump has been really cool because you're able to observe things it's way out of the norm. It's totally out of the norm. So that's a great example of how Hispanics have gone up while white educated voters went down. And the answer, though, to that question is, I don't think you're going to see the numbers. We've never gotten to 30%. Some of these other, and I know Spencer at Emerson. We've spoken. He's a good. I think he's that is a legitimate finding. I just don't think you're going to see those approval among Blacks turn into 30% vote share.
I think the high water mark was Reagan's reelection in 84.
Right.
I believe he got 14 or 15%.
Before Nixon, going
back.
But
back then Nixon did much better than that. That was kind of a different time. I got to check on one thing down the hall. I'll be right back.
Go ahead. So yeah, just and I'll elaborate on that. So I think that basically it will take a long time for Republicans, if they really, really wanted to make inroads among Black voters. It would take Republicans, a while. It took Democrats cycles to take that voting block from the Republican Party. It took them culture wars, there was just numerous factors that went into that. And I don't see that happening because of the economy changing. And the reason why I tell you that is because we have seen, like Tim just mentioned, the economy was raging when Ronald Reagan was reelected, and he was the higher watermark for, if you want to call the 84 modern presidential history. The electorate is a lot different than it was in 1984. But still, that's the high watermark, and we're still only talking about low teens, so we're not talking about a huge jump. Now, some of you may say that's all he needs. That could be true, and that typically is true, as long as he doesn't lose or bleed too much among white working class, which I don't really, unless the economy's horrible, I don't think he would. That's not where Joe Biden has a path. His path is with educated whites in the suburbs to offset that. The voters that Hillary in the end really didn't get. And everybody thought she would, but she didn't. And white women who are educated, suburban women, or even, those who live in the suburbs but aren't particularly educated, everybody thought those would be Hillary voters. And it turned out that they were not. And they did, by the way, down here in Florida, they were key, along with the rage and Cuban population he had. They were key to keeping Trump's margin up enough here. It will take a big reach out effort to make huge inroads among black voters specifically. Hispanics, they're a little bit different. And as we talked about a little bit on Friday, it depends what kind of Hispanic voters you're talking about. It really does. They're not monolithic at all. They have never been monolithic. There are, if you could make the argument in the era of Obama that black voters did vote near monolithically. That's not the case with Hispanic voters, and it's never been the case. So Puerto Ricans in Florida, for instance, they voted against Donald Trump in one of the biggest margins for Hillary. He's actually improved quite a bit among them, a surprising amount. And in other states too, which is why you see people like Brad Parscale, the president's campaign manager, very optimistic about states like Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada. With me, I'm not that optimistic. I'm not. He would need a third party candidate maybe to split the vote share out there. If his vote share support, his approval rating in a state like New Mexico, for instance, held water and translated almost, verbatim into his actual vote share on election day, and there was a Gary Johnson and a Jill Stein in the race, we could have seen something very different happen, but we didn't. Nevada was even closer, but Trump trounced Hillary Clinton among independents in Nevada, and that is not at all certain this time around. If anybody, Dean Heller, who was actually slightly favored, that was one of the misses on our modeling in the Senate race. And that is because Dean Heller in the past had showed the ability to win independents by a large enough margin in Nevada to hold on. But in the end, he lost Washoe County, which is what did him in. And I'm not convinced that the electorate in 2020 in that state is going to look like the electorate in 2016. If it did, then Trump probably could eke out a win there. But Clark County is just too big for a Republican to lose Washoe. They have to, not only do they have to bring that back, back into their fold. They lost that in 18. Not only did they have to bring that back, but they have to win it significantly, like Dean Heller did and Donald Trump did, but in 2016. But Romney did well out there too. He just couldn't do good enough. He won independents in that state. He just didn't win them by a margin big enough, nowhere near big enough. Well, looks like Tim's back with us. I'll bring it in. Were you listening to that over there,
yes.
Tim?
Yes.
It's just a heavy lift for me, in my mind. And, on the topic of whether his approval number would translate into more votes, I think the answer, just to, just to circle back to expats so he understands, the answer is, yeah, I do. Especially if the economy's running well again, if we're back up and running, I do think it will translate into more votes. Do I think it will translate into a sea change? No. That's going to take time. That's going to take, by the way, Republicans working with people who traditionally make Republicans nervous or uncomfortable. I know some really great conservatives that have, I don't even know a better word other than street cred. Okay. So these voters are won over in their churches. They're won over in their hair salons. They're won over in their barbecues and their block parties. Barack Obama was a genius at that. Democrats are very smart when it comes to that. And Republicans are trying to win a game they're not even playing, is my point. And the people they do turn to, some of the what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to, but some of the outreach people that they choose to do outreach really have no street cred with these voters. They're not going to change generations of voting behavior because the next Twitter star who happens to be the same color said to vote for them. That's not going to happen. This is going to take time, and it's going to take Republicans rethinking what they believe is outreach to minorities, specifically Black Americans. They almost don't understand their experience at all. And that you cannot reach out to people if you don't understand, that their experience. And I'm not saying they even downplay it. I'm saying understand it. Affluent voters in minority communities are one thing, but that's not where the mass number of voting blocks in minority communities come from. It's not. What's your take on that? I mean, I get people saying, he's 25 in this poll, or he's at this and that poll. I get that, folks. But it took years to put together these relationships. These are deep, long-term relationships. They're not going to be broken overnight.
I think for Trump to get 12 to 15% of the African-American vote is very doable. But I don't see it being in the low to mid-20s.
Me either.
But for him to get 12, if he got, I can't remember what they said from 16, 6%, 8%. If he would have bumped that up to 12 to 15%, that would be very difficult for the Democrats to win certain states.
And also, too, if he can hold on to those increases in approvals among Hispanic voters, and we talked a little bit about Cuban voters on Friday. They're with him down here in Florida. They're not going anywhere. They're with him. It's Puerto Ricans in Orange County. That's a good explanation. And some of this is geography too.
Right.
So interestingly, Ron DeSantis actually did pretty well among Puerto Rican voters. And when we went in, we looked at it. A lot of it was, number one, where are they on the income spectrum? That's number one. And number two, where do they live? So, Broward County, Orange County is a tough nut to crack.
Sure.
But if you can make inroads in other areas of the state, then, it offsets the statewide margin. So, again, and then of course,
he probably did much better with the Puerto Rican voters in the I-4 corridor than he did
absolutely
in Southeast Florida.
And at the same time, both him and Rick Scott did worse in places like Pinellas and Monroe, where Monroe, I'm not surprised with the Senate race in Monroe County. Bill Nelson was very well liked and very well respected, even among older white Republicans. If you go back and look at Bill Nelson's victories, the reason why they were so outsized sometimes is because he won a good deal of Republicans who viewed him to be an old space warrior, he's an American hero. That's the way they viewed him anyway. But then he just made a series of decisions that did him in, because you cannot always toe the party line in a state like Florida. If you're a Democrat, you can't always toe the party line and then, go back to the voters 4 years later, 8 years later, 6 years, whatever you're running from, and then say, I'm a moderate. Well, at some point you have to say, well, which judge did you vote for? Right.
And the voters will say, that's not the guy I remember. That's exactly not the guy I voted for 6 years ago.
That's exactly what happened to Bill Nelson down here. Right. And Governor Scott was one of the biggest political image makeovers I have ever polled. This guy was the man at winning elections, tight governor elections, being relatively unliked not disliked. I mean, he
He
would
had his first, I remember, because I lived in Florida for his first
Alex Sink.
gubernatorial election. He ran against Alex Sink. She had name recognition. She had a little bit of a mark on her as being a Bank of America executive. It was just after the TARP bailout, et cetera, et cetera. I think it was in 2010, right?
Yeah, 2010 during the wave.
But Scott had this tarnish to him of being a senior healthcare executive.
Yeah, that hurt him.
For a company that had some questionable things going on, I believe, while he was there. And there were even a lot of Republicans in the primary that were not in favor of him and were not happy when he won the primary.
And that was also, too, just to put that into context, that was during a time where the Tea Party movement had risen down here.
Yep.
And well, everywhere, but I mean, I watched it down here. And, the idea, I mean, Tea Party was really birthed out of the TARP bailout. And the idea of somebody like Rick Scott, who had his issues with Medicare and whatever, Medicaid or whatever it was, that was a problem. And for most of his first term, which he eked it out, by the way, and in an election where Republicans won 60-something House seats, racked up a handful of Senate seats.
It was a tight election.
Very tight. And by the way, it shouldn't have been. It should have been pretty, it should have been a Republican win by probably 4 points or so if you were to, look at the rest of the country. That didn't happen. And he's very good at driving his opponent's negatives to the moon. He really is the master at that. And like you said, Alex Sink was well known. She was liked. Yeah. And, and her last name meant something down here. And by the time he was done ripping her up, he just, it's just like, he just shredded her. And then when he was up for re-election, he really didn't make any better inroads with his image. His image was still very bad. 40%, 38% viewed him favorably. But by that time, what he had going for him was that he was an effective executive. So when we asked people, they didn't like Charlie Crist flip-flopping, which is who he ran against. Charlie Crist was an extremely popular Republican governor down here. Even Democrats liked the guy. Everybody loved him. And when he turned parties because he licked his finger to see which way the wind was blowing, people down here, that was it. I mean, he almost killed himself right there. And he ran a good race, except he ran a good messaging race, I'd say, to be able to try to combat that. But his get out the vote, he took on loan from Obama. And they gave him their get out the vote operation. Right. And which he touted. But at that time, nobody trusted him. The Republicans that used to respect him, where he had an opportunity to get some more crossover, he stabbed them in the back. And then
probably didn't get much crossover vote.
He didn't. And then in southeastern Florida, where everyone thought he would really run it up, that didn't happen because Democrats were like, this guy was a Republican. Right. Nobody trusted him. Right. So that was the end of that. But then when his most masterful race was against Bill Nelson. At that time, he had his image. I'll tell you right off the bat, Hurricane Irma changed Rick Scott's image. It was unbelievable how the man, we probably polled him pre-Irma maybe 24 times. And his approval rating was never higher than 42%. It was amazing. Amazing. That is a loser at 42% and any other guy. Post Irma, and really during, his approval went to the moon. It went to he was at the 60%, I think, at the height of that, which it naturally came back down to earth because that wasn't his natural rating. But by the time, and people can go to Big Data Poll and check it out, by the time we were polling him against Bill Nelson was still better liked than him, But the question really came down to who will make a more effective senator who represents you. And when we asked whether Bill Nelson was still the same person who ran for Senate, his first Senate bid, it was bad. And that's what did him in. And Rick Scott was running around with these ads, Tim. This not to I never like playing any cards, but he didn't have the upbringing that I think a lot of people would have assumed he had. He was raised by a single mother. It was not easy. It wasn't. So people look at Rick Scott and they thought, well, this is a super rich guy, white rich guy. He doesn't understand me. And here comes Rick Scott with these ads walking hand in hand with Puerto Ricans and other people and, neighbors. And he did one where he went back to his, I think it was his old neighbor. I don't know. And he's like, I was raised by a single mother, and they were walking hand in hand down the road. Yeah. I saw that ad and I said, this guy is dangerous. He's dangerously smart, and he got it. And I mean, the guy connected with me. I shared nothing with him. And I was like, I was like rubbing my eyes after the ad. I'm like, this is genius, but it was just incredible. And, when combination of revamping your image and then having the reputation as being an effective leader, that's it. That's how you take out a 3-term incumbent senator. And, and nobody was better than that than him, All right, I'm 5 minutes over. Let's get back to it. Then I'm going to ask you for another quick update, okay? But let's go through my little spiel here, okay?
Do it.
And we'll check your questions when I come back. While Tim's giving the market update after my little word from the sponsor here, I'll go and look at questions again because I do see the notification timeline rolling up. And maybe we'll enable comments tomorrow and they can go on YouTube and just ask them. But in any event, so again, we're going to do this week, all week on YouTube, even though initially we weren't going to do that. You can still go watch it on PPD, and I can see people are, but you can check it out on YouTube. It's just an easier platform. And we figured we would have expected by now maybe some normalcy to come back, but we're just not seeing that yet. So people are home, basically. What else do they have to do? So basically we decided to keep this going on YouTube for another week. And then maybe next week, hopefully, because that means normalcy's back, we'll just have Monday through Thursday on PPD and Friday free day on YouTube, and we'll answer your questions. But anyway, you want to support the show. We're not doing Patreon or anything like that over here. Just go to PPD and subscribe if you want to support us. That's the way to support us. All right. So I'm going to come back now. It's 11:36, Tim. I'm going to give you the floor here. I'm going to read some questions. When I pop back in, I'll answer some more.
Okay, so financial markets are very close to their highs of the day. The Dow is up just over 1,000 points, very close to plus 5%. S&P and NASDAQ showing similar gains. The biggest concern I would have right now in the market is that oil is down 6.5%. Tremendous amount of anticipation on Friday over a potential deal between Saudi Arabia and Russia, that they would agree to production cuts and have maybe in the range of 10 to 15% production cuts that would put some floor under the price of oil in an atmosphere where not just the United States, but a good chunk of Europe and other parts of the country are on shutdown. Oil demand has gone through the floor, almost through the basement. And if they're not able to come to an agreement, I think if an agreement was totally off the table, oil would be down a lot more. It's trading around $26.50. It was about 28.25 on Friday at the end of the day. That's down 6.5%. It could double those declines on the day if they came out with a statement that we're not able to reach an agreement. Now, if they say we're still talking and we're close, we're trying to work out the details of it, then the market would still have a little bit of an attitude that, well, okay, we'll kind of believe it when we see it. I think that's why we're down 6.5% today. Oil had a very large run late last week. and just to get it to stabilize somewhere in the mid to high 20s, maybe to have a shot at holding the $25 level over the next couple of weeks when things are really, when the economy's still really locked down in a number of parts of the globe, would actually be maybe a little positive for oil going into the remainder of the month.
Yeah, that's good stuff. And I don't know if you caught the press conference on Friday with Trump with the oil prices. That was so funny. The wise guy asked that comment, and he's like, "Don't you mean the other way around?" He was trying to be nice. The guy's, why didn't you do more to make sure there was this supply that? And he's like, "You do know how supply and demand works, right?" It was so funny. Guy just sat. I mean, that sent him right in his tracks. He just stopped him right in his tracks. But that was funny. And I think, that deal that we'll have to see. But he picks up the phone and he makes a call or a couple of calls, and he's still amazing to me. One of the things that actually still is amazing to me is how effective this guy is, Tim. Even though he's been handicapped by all these investigations throughout his term, now he's got this going on, and yet when he still picks up the phone and makes these calls, it's almost like these people don't believe, like their worst nightmare is probably going to come true again, and they don't want to be, on Wednesday in November, they don't want to have to make the congratulatory call, and they want to make sure that that everything is copacetic.
Look, I mean, I think he had probably a different message to both Putin and to MBS, the leader in Saudi Arabia. To Putin, I think it was kind of like, you really don't want oil to trade into the mid to high teens and just sit there for a few months. I know you're basically a communist country and you can do whatever you want, and you'll even if the people are up in arms over it, and then you can battle your way through it, but it's really gonna be bad. And I think the message to MBS is something along the lines of, I know that your cost of getting it out of the ground is $12 and you can handle this even a little bit better than Russia can, but this is not a good optic. We've been your best friend. You've had some tough times the last couple of years. We've always been there. We'll always be there. But we don't, in normal times, I can understand this fight with Russia, but this is not normal times. And we just can't have this right now. You got to pick another time to have this fight with Russia.
And you can almost see that's at the press conference. He even, my friend, he does this, and it's almost like he's off the phone, but he's reminding them, through his answers to the press. You know what I mean? How he does this. He's reminding them, we've been your friend. Don't make me not be your friend, kind of thing. And so I got three that I jotted down while you were giving this given that market break, and they were good. So I did say, somebody reminded me, I guess I did. I sent a tweet earlier this morning talking about the governor of Illinois and how we would discuss a little bit more about the governors and how they're derelict. And, Donald Trump's the easiest punching bag in the world. But the fact of the matter is, these guys have been spending. So what is the job of a governor, right? They are the state executive. And you have the governor of Illinois go on the Sunday shows. And, what does he not understand about FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, right? Or what, however he put it.
Right.
He doesn't seem to understand. Could you imagine if FEMA's real duty was to make sure every state in the country had enough ventilators?
Yeah, right.
Are we serious right now?
Right.
This is their job. And the fact is, Democrats from these states where they're blowing holes in their budget have been giving away goodies, and that's what they spend their money on. And they don't spend it on things that, these are people who they were warned that they should have enough ventilators. They should have enough masks. Yep. They decided that it would be electorally beneficial to not worry about that stuff. Keep your fingers crossed and hope that it doesn't happen.
Right.
I'm sorry, folks, but it's a bleak picture to paint, but it is the truth. This is what they've done, and they abdicated their duty. And now, because Donald Trump is the figure he is, they're blaming him and acting as if FEMA was responsible for their duties all along. And what makes me angry about that is it tells you they have such a low opinion of the American people. And they think the American people aren't smart enough to know that, or smart enough that when somebody like me or you or anybody else will tell them that they don't take it to heart. And they hope that they're just so filled with hate for the guy that they'll believe it. This was their job, and they didn't do it. And by the way, after the swine flu, there is things that we can criticize Donald Trump about because we had the swine flu. And yes, I know Obama did not replenish the N95 mask. He didn't. Okay. And Donald Trump, by the way, should have, almost 3 years in, there's going to be plenty of things we can legitimately blame Donald Trump for doing, but this isn't one of them. The stockpile, to the other wise guy reporter, the stockpile of masks that the federal government has is for the military, employees, the United States government, the Department of Defense being the number one, is the single largest employer in the world. That stockpile is not just, if there really was, let's say, imagine an Ebola death rate kind of pandemic. All right. That is what those masks are for. Those people who will have to be on the ground with boots and guns to keep people locked up in a horrible pandemic. Those are the people those masks are for. It is not for the state who decided not to use a responsible portion of their budget to make sure that they were prepared for a moment like this. So I hope that answers that one question. And I did circle back to talk about that. But also, this one's I'm going to go to the small business one first, because the other one we could probably take away the rest of the show with. How are these small business loans doing here Monday, Tim? You may have heard more about this. I will simply say on Friday, yes, there were, since Tim and I did the show, there were a lot of things that went on with the PPA after we told you where to go to get information about how to, for payroll loans and stuff like that. We understand. We heard it. We talked to people. We know there were a lot of community banks that were not, they didn't have guidelines. Really, the backstory, and I think people should know this, the backstory is that the SBA threw out what are basically restrictions and guidelines. So that really, with the smaller banks, it was a question of risk. Who's going to assume some of this? Do we really not have risk? And I guess Mnuchin didn't make it clear enough or they want it in writing. They want an actual the Treasury to release, something that would put them at ease. So a lot of them just sat back on Friday, and people were calling their banks that were smaller banks, and they weren't able to get the loans. And they said, call back on Monday, check the website for updates. I know, I understand that, folks. And I read some of the comments. They were horrible. I read them.
Right.
It was Tim and I told when we were reading them, I was actually like half mad and half very upset, because I felt for you people. I understand. I really do. I get it. And hopefully today. So the question is, did they clear some of this up? And then is Bank of America still, and I don't think we have an answer to this, but is Bank of America still doing what they did on Friday, which is punish people who had net revenue plus, and never had to borrow from them. So whether they had a credit card, that I hear did qualify. You did qualify if you had a credit card. But if you did not have an existing lending relationship, then Bank of America basically added that where it said nowhere in the bill. And I know all I can say, and I'll give it to Tim, maybe he's got more on this, but all I can say is that I did whack the Treasury Secretary over it. And we made calls, and they said they know, and they were getting on it, and they were going to make sure some of the smaller banks come Monday had the guidance and, had some of their concerns dealt with, so they could get to lending too, because it is a first come, first serve basis. And they understand this. They do. So let's see. What you hear anything on this, Tim?
Well, the only things that I've heard are that the big banks, Chase, maybe to a lesser extent Bank America, but Bank America has this issue where they're not, you need to have an existing business relationship. Chase was still trying to get it all worked with their system, maybe get a little bit of clarification from Treasury, and a couple of other banks probably also. The big community, you know, if you're a small business out there and you're worried about missing out, the good news is I believe that less than 10 billion of the 360 billion has been committed so far. So there's still plenty of money that is available to be committed on this. And there's also an issue with Wells Fargo, where some of the restrictions put on Wells Fargo in the aftermath of their issue that they had with their branches and intermingling their branches with Wells Fargo brokerage services, where they were creating false accounts for people to meet like sales goals, et cetera, et cetera. They're maxed out at a certain number, and they've already got that amount of applications in. And so they're saying they're trying to cajole the government a little bit. Look, if you take all these restrictions off us, we could do more. I bet the government's not going to do that.
Yeah, nice try. Nice try.
So I think that, look, there's kinks in the system. There's no doubt about it. I think that even some comments from Mnuchin on Saturday morning were like, we're aware that there's some issues. We're working on it. I imagine they kind of worked on it all weekend long. I would just really, if you're talking to a local bank or credit union or whoever it might be, I would just say, keep talking to them. Don't drop the ball. Keep calling them up. Keep talking to, if you got to go in and see them, if they're letting people to visit the bank, just keep on them, because this is a program that was put in position in an unbelievably short amount of time, and they are highly motivated not to let this turn into an embarrassing situation.
Yeah, that's what the response actually from Treasury was reasonable. You know, I mean, it's a huge program, program. So it is the government. They're not very competent, you know, or I mean, there's a reason why the entire country, has that ingrained in its DNA. I mean, that belief, because it is true. And they're trying also to move quicker than other stimulus bills that we've seen in the past. I mean, the only comparable, I don't even think it is comparable, the American Recovery Act, the Recovery and Reinvestment Act. That was $250 to individuals, and then a bailout, right? So that was, the bailout was not the same. We're talking about totally different situations here. But I'll follow up today, Tim. I will follow up with them today, and I'll see if I can get a little bit more information, because in case we get that question again, because I was burning on Friday. I really was. I mean, I'm reading them after Tim and I did the show. We talked later, and I'm like, look at these messages. I was not happy. I was angry. I mean, they're just people who are doing business for 10, 20 years. And they call their bank, and the bank is like, I can't help you. I have no idea. Or even worse, the Bank of America issue. I mean, that defeats the whole purpose of the bill, having your own little nugget thrown in there. And then also too, it's not just that. It's that it punishes people who never had to leverage their business before. So they were in the black. They were doing things right, meeting payroll without needing any loans or lending assistance at all. And they were punished for that. And also, there is a little matter of, who needs loans and finance, folks? We have a very wide definition of small business. You would not think of some of these companies as a small business. The banks lend to them. So it was a way to cut out mom and pop operations, or at least that's as I'm reading it and I'm piecing together who had a good time and who didn't, who had a good experience and who didn't. That's what it reminded me of. And it was driving me nuts because I'm thinking to myself, Bank of America is doing first come, first serve to their friends and the ones they lend to. Because if the bank is lending these companies money, that means those are the companies that fuel the bank's balance sheet. And the rest of them who just hold their cash with them and never need lending to make payroll and to finance the mortgage or the lease or whatever is covered, and PPA is a lot covered in there. Did not seem right to me to punish those people simply because they never needed a loan from the bank, which the bank could profit off of. So they were going to their buddies first, their good lending relationships first. That's not what's in the bill. That's not even why the bill was written. So, we'll see. But I will follow up with Treasury today, and I'll see what we can find out. And then tomorrow, hopefully, I'll have more on that. And I'll tweet it out if I find it beforehand. I'll tweet it first, but then we'll talk about it more a little bit tomorrow in case you guys have some questions. Because believe me, I read your messages. I get it. I was like not happy. All right, and then the last one, really, I don't even think we can answer. We could take the last 5 minutes of the show with it. Basically, I mean, will the economy rebound before the election? Take it away, Tim.
I think that it will, but clearly, that would be predicated on getting the virus under control and getting large chunks of people back to work. But we may not see the hardcore economic data being reported the way it's typically reported before the election. So third quarter, people say, look, second quarter is a very much of a very rough. The beginning of the second quarter, we're a week into the second quarter right now. Maybe in June, which will be the last month of the second quarter, we start to see some uptick in economic activity. It's really third quarter where we're hoping, and fourth quarter where we're hoping to see a rebound. The election's in the fourth quarter, so we're not going to see reports on it then. And the third quarter, we really won't get initial reports on third quarter GDP until the end of October, just a couple weeks before the election. But I think that the reality is people will feel it. If there are big chunks of people back to work and things are operating somewhat normally, and we figured out how we can have restaurants open with people being comfortable going in there, maybe in initially in areas that have not been hot spots, we're going to feel whether it's such an extreme shutdown, you're going to feel it if the economy is coming back.
Well, that's why I said too, that it would not even be it is not unheard or unreasonable to think that you could see those. It's going to be like a 1 month lag because the reporting period for the employment situation report, like we spoke about before, it's always really a half month until those revisions come.
Right.
But it wouldn't be unheard of to see a huge few months. So if the economy is going to be rebounding by the summer, you could see like a really, like maybe June or July will start to show it. You'll start to feel it.
You'll get retail sales numbers. You'll get some back to school shopping. You'll get some travel going on in the summer, at the end of the summer.
And then you'll see some of that in August and in September. If it does, I wouldn't be surprised to see this monster jobs report in August or something, where it's just a big number, and then I know
maybe even July.
That's right. And that all depends, because we only got like less than 2 minutes here. That's why I've been so big about the antibodies testing.
Right.
We need the antibodies testing. That's why I was chipper at 10 a.m. when the show started, because that is we got that signal today. And, like I said on Friday, Dr. Birx understands this. It's not just for the denominator, but she seems to have a better way. She seems to have a wider focus than some of the other medical professionals.
She's really in charge. She's really the person who was picked to run this whole effort to report directly to Mike Pence and the president. I know a lot of people are running around with their hair on fire about Anthony Fauci and some things that he says. But look, let's say that he was put out of the picture.
It's not in the driver's seat.
You're just gonna have somebody else of the same mentality from NIH come over with all the same talking points.
Right.
So I don't really think it gets you anywhere to like have him be eliminated from the situation, because you're just going to have someone with a similar mentality, one level down, come take his place. The only other thing I just want to say real quick before you shut off, there's some chatter now going on that Russia is very interested in having talks about significant oil production cuts. That's got oil rallying a little bit over $27. It was 26.5 about a half an hour ago, and it looks like the markets are trying to make a new leg higher, with most of the major market averages up more than 5%.
That's great. And we were talking about that earlier in the show. That's good news. I mean, he's a pragmatist, folks. We demonized him for 3 years, but he's a pragmatist. I mean, at some point, like Trump said, this is not good for him long term. So this is good to hear. All right, let me take us out here. So again, do you want to support the show? Just go to PPD and subscribe. And we will be doing this on YouTube again tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, which we'll just have to see how it goes for next week. I mean, it is what it is. If we're still looking like everything's clamped, then we'll probably repeat the same thing. We'll see how it goes. All right. But in the meantime, follow TJ Anderson1 on Twitter. Follow Tim on Twitter at TJ Anderson1. Mine's below my face right here. You know where to find me, at peoples_pundit. And we will see you back here at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. All the best for Eastern time, 10 a.m. Eastern time. All the best, folks. Talk to you tomorrow.